There is a very dark heart at the centre of English folk music and English folk culture. It's not all milkmaids and hey nonny knows that a lot of people seem to think it is. Lots of blood and death, and it's serious stuff.
We're in Aldeburgh at Snape Maltings for an event that's conjured up really in the imagination of Paul Smith, who'd been reading J.B. Priestley's English Journey, which is a book that takes the temperature culturally of England by travelling around in the 1930s. Paul had a sense that it would be interesting to take a bunch of disparate artists and writers, musicians out on a journey through England now. And the first convenient stop was at Aldeburgh, because it has a tradition of its own, and he wanted to respect this tradition and also to challenge it in some ways by doing more subversive things. When I was starting out as a novelist in the 1980s, this guy, Paul Smith, appeared. I didn't really know what he did for a living. He was loosely connected in the music business. He managed bands and he was part of Mute Records. We started to make recordings of books, and we did a few events together in London in which bunches of writers would get together in peculiar venues and do performances, rather than just keep a book as a rarefied production to be seen by critics and reviewed.
Iain and Alan had always wanted to do something together. Probably not this, but nonetheless, that's what you ended up doing. A bunch of obsessive people seems to have a certain energy about it.
You do make it sound like a hospital outing. I've always had a soft spot for the multimedia presentation ever since I was part of the Arts Lab movement in the 60s, which was a mashup, I believe, in the current terminology. You just have artists, writers, musicians, sculptors all coming together.
Metal hammer here for the bricks, small hammer, some spanners. I like to play with found objects. I'm a percussionist, so I'm the part of the three-man orchestra. So I work with Susan Stengel and the hurdy-gurdy player, Steve. So we're a three-piece band for today.
Where else would you ever see Shirley Collins and Mufti working together on the same show? But interesting things come out of it. It's these kind of collisions. Certain abilities come to light which maybe weren't the things that we were thinking we would be following when we first got here. And Mufti and I, for instance, have spent most of the week making films.
Susan has picked some of the darkest things, like the burning of the straw bear from the Whittlesea Festival in Cambridgeshire, and she's interposed it with burning of witches in the 17th century. The whole thing does get to be rather frightening.
Ploughmen used to dress up in fantastic costumes, men dressed as women, and dance around the town with a straw bear, going from pub to pub to pub. And that kind of music, which is folk but which has a savage bass to it, was, I think, a crossover between what Shirley was doing and what I'd been doing in terms of writing about the poet John Clare, who came from that part of the world.
I'm also reading a couple of pieces of prose, one piece of poetry from John Clare, the peasant poet, who, although very successful as a poet in the earlier part of his life, ended up in an asylum in Epping Forest and just wanted to get home, and eventually broke out and walked from Epping Forest back to Northampton. He wrote an account of his journey, all on foot, of course, a lot of it barefoot and sleeping rough.
The reality is that very disparate people with very different interests and inspirations end up in one place, and the magic is the magic of the place itself and how it will affect them. And the preconceived notions they come with are going to be changed, and what they're uncovering isn't a hidden England, but it's a hidden part of themselves, inspired by parts of England. This event is in this chain of the re-forgotten, in that all of us at various times command a certain kind of attention, and then retreat and disappear, and place itself works in that way. But Aldeburgh itself has so many layers of cultural memory, and certain ones are talked up a lot and other ones are forgotten. And I think the whole process here is that we cast a wide enough spectrum and touch on some of the things that are not necessarily remembered, or connections that are not obvious.